As far as I see, the translation and the interpretation is going very smoothly. And then I decided to speak in Turkish. Welcome, everyone. And when I see 65 participants here, I was a little excited, to tell you the truth. Welcome, and thank you for being with us under difficult circumstances. And it is very nice to be together with our feminist sisters, especially in these difficult times. In fact, Elif mentioned I'm a Mor Çatı volunteer for a while. And in fact, before the edition in Mor Çatı, it was in fact circulated and published by a smaller printing house back in 2009. And how did I decide to translate this book? In fact, I was communicating with the international partners, and I had known Åsa recently. She was working on violence, and I worked with violence. And at that time, she recommended me Eva's book, and at the time it was translated into English already. And when I was reading the book, I realized that in Mor Çatı, for years, we had accumulated experience and we had developed arguments, we had made observations. And from different perspectives, we had parallels with the research that was conducted in Sweden. And feminist knowledge was present before Mor Çatı, but all the feminists were saying that men could be addicts, alcohol addicts, and narcotics addicts, and they exert violence. And we were saying that normal man wouldn't engage in violence. That was what we claimed. And in the previous publications, in fact, things are being told as if these are normal men, these are ordinary men. And seeing this similarity through the books and seeing the similarities among the experiences through the books was very interesting for me. And I decided to translate it into Turkish. And Åsa talked with Eva. Eva found this very positive, and I started translating the book. And afterwards, as I said, the printing house was closed, and then with Mor Çatı, I started engaging in a dialogue, and it was in parallel with the efforts it was carrying out. So we decided to have the second edition by Mor Çatı in 2012. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I want to say something. In the preface, I briefly mentioned the fact that the normalization of violence as a concept can be read from two aspects. Men who appear completely normal can exert violence, as shown by Eva through her research. On the other hand, women who are victims of violence can stay in this violence loop. And the area of freedom for women is being shrinked by the man who exerts violence. He claims that the friends are not good for her, or the family members good for her. And with friends damaged, and the woman is isolated, and this is performed intentionally, and women are left weak, and they are not strong anymore. So Eva Lundgren is very successful in presenting this to us. And the second edition was written by Eva Lundgren recently, and there are things that are added to the book. And so I would like to give the floor to Åsa so that we can hear what is new in the new edition of the book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. And I am as well very, very happy to be here. I'm very happy to see so many people gathered. And I'm especially happy because I know that you are going through extremely hard times. It's difficult to be on a distance to see what the hardships that you are going through in Turkey right now. But I'm very, very happy to be able to be here with you today, and that we have this 1.5 hours to talk about the normalization process of violence, which is something that, as we know, is unfortunately present everywhere, regardless of the outer circumstances that we have among us. So thank you so much for the introduction, Elif, and also Berna. I'm very happy. I mean, we go way back now, and it's kind of it feels really good to think back about in the time and to think about the times where you, Berna, read this normalization process and you initiated the translation. And as you mentioned, Eva was very, very happy that this was also translated to Turkish. I mean, she knew that this is a theory on violence that has gained international recognition, but it's also very, and it is, as you mentioned, we have it translated to English, but it's also, I mean, very important to have it in Turkish, and I'm very, very happy that you are now launching the 3rd edition, which is, I mean, great, and it really shows that this book and the way that Eva Lundgren thinks about violence and has developed this theory is as important and is as urgent as as you said, this is a process that has been developed. I mean, for Eva's research that started in Norway, she is from Norway. That's why I have translated to Swedish, although she's been living in Sweden for many years. Now she's back in Norway, though. But this research started already in 1984. The first version of the actual normalization process of violence was published in 1989 by Roks. And then we have the version that I have been translating now is actually the 4th one in Swedish. So it is really a process where Eva, for each edition, adds different aspects and develops the theory based on her current research that is going on. And before I say a few words about what's new about this 4th edition, that I really hope will be translated to English so that it can be translated then to Turkish, is to say that, I mean, say a few things about what was to you know, join what Berna said, what was so important with this theory, and that is that it's first of all, of course, that it takes women's experiences of violence as its point of departure, which is what feminist research does, and which is what the women's shelters movement all over the world does. And when this was done, I mean, for us, it feels so self-evident that this is what you should do if you talk about men's violence against women. But it was not, as we know, and it still is not self-evident. So this is something that is really important to stress, I think, that it is about listening to the women who are exposed to violence and to take their experiences as the point of departure for how we understand violence and how we take action against violence and how we support and how we see solidarity in support in supporting women who have been exposed to violence. And as Berna mentioned, when we talk about normality, it's also about seeing violence not as something that is deviant, that is out there, but that is something that we all experience in one way or another. Not to see a violent relationship as something that is completely different if you compare with a so-called normal relationship. Yes. Sorry? Is there a problem?
No, I guess that was a microphone that suddenly
okay,
was opened
okay.
or something.
I thought someone
no,
said my name. So.
No.
But it's also, when you talk about normality, it's also about that it's statistically normal. Men's violence against women is something that is very common, unfortunately. So it's also normal in that sense. Sorry, I'm coughing a bit. It's just because I had a cold before, but I'm okay. So I just want to say sorry for that on beforehand. And the normalization process is also about, so from focusing on something that is external or on women's behavior to women's experiences, it's also about trying to, find external explanations, like Berna said, like alcohol, for example, or a difficult childhood, or a different kind of addictions, or for that sake, different experiences. Instead, looking at the consequences of violence, what is happening in a violent relationship. So there were many, and a very important aspect also is, of course, we know this is called the normalization process. So to look at violence as a process, to see that things are happening when you are subjected to violence, when you are using violence, subjected to violence as a woman, when you are using violence as a man, and also for children being in that environment, something is happening. There is a process that changes things when violence is there. And then the normalization process also looks at the consequences of violence. What is happening? And see these consequences as gendered. It has to do with gender. It has to do with how we make manhood and femalehood. And that also that there is in this process, there is an internalization, so that the woman who is abused takes over the reality of the abuser, of the man who abuses. And thus this catches the dynamics of violence. So, so the normalization process of violence was a completely different way of thinking, and is throughout the years, Eva has developed this way of thinking, so that it's not the same as it was, but the core aspects of this, look at the consequences, use women's experiences as a point of departure, and look at the process of violence and the consequences of violence, and not look at the deviance, but rather look at what is a normality in this. These are the aspects that was, and to some extent still is groundbreaking in the way we see violence. So, Berna, please interrupt me if you have any question or if there is anything that you want me to, elaborate on.
Yes, that's actually, you were just making very clear the theory of Eva at its core, and it's never enough to underline the fact that violence is actually in the ordinary at the ordinary level of experience for all of us. It's nothing that we can put in a box, and it's nothing like in our, I mean, we always say that we all face violence in our everyday lives, but we don't know how to point it out. But on the other hand, when you look at it, I mean, when you look at the process of violence in the way Eva puts it, then you see that even though there is no physical contact, even though there is no physical violence, an unfriendly look by the perpetrator or by the partner at home, the male partner at home, the way in which he looks at you, the way in which he looks at your dress, and makes you feel like you're somehow inappropriate. All of these things that seems very trivial, very ordinary, are actually part of this process of violence. So it's never enough to we can underline this point many times in that sense. So
yeah, that's a very important point, and to see how also when physical violence or sexual violence, when the severe violence is happening, is only part of, as you say, it's only a very small part of the process, the whole process. But the fact that these are happening makes, there is a link between all these events, even if they sometimes don't happen that often. You always know that they might happen. And if you, as you say, if you get that look, or if you get that comment, or if you get that very small sign, there is fear throughout the process, and the point here is also that the first steps may seem very small or even nothing, but then when the first hit comes, very often Eva says women are aware that this is very wrong, this is not okay, but they say, okay, this was only a one-time thing, and okay, I will forgive him, and I will, no, he's not like that really. He's nice most of the time. And then when it happens again, you already have that explanation, so you make that explanation again, and the boundaries for what is okay and not are pushed, so that what was not okay in the beginning is okay after a while throughout this process, and that's part of this internalization.
And also, she explains that the man actually makes the woman believe that it's her fault.
Exactly. Somehow. Yes.
So that's the reason why also it becomes normal for the woman, and then she also monitors herself, the way in which she acts. She changes all of her behavior to fit into the model that the man, has in mind, or the model that she thinks the man has in mind. But on the other hand, the man changes the contours, the framework all the time to,
yes,
to make her space smaller and smaller. So
yeah, oh, sorry, exactly, and it's, I mean, from the beginning, the things that women often think that it's his fault, but then they have an explanation that says, okay, maybe he had a bad day, or maybe that, I mean, as I said, he's not like that really. But as you say, after a while, they don't even think it's his fault anymore. They think it's their fault themselves. So then they don't need any explanations, because it's in them, and they have to change to avoid the violence. And when this is starting, and when women blame themselves, it becomes, I mean, after a while, quite dangerous, because then it's very difficult also to have from outsiders to say that no, this is not okay, because she is defending it herself.
Exactly.
But what is, and another very important aspect in this is that because what Eva first did was that she interviewed women, but then she decided to interview also men, to see what they think about, I mean, how they talk about the violence that they use. Because often we think that, I mean, men are not, that this is something that they can't help, or they really don't want to do it, but what she found was that, well, she instead of asking the question, why do they beat, she asked, what do men gain from beating? And she also saw, I mean, then she saw that they gained a lot. They gained a lot of control. They gained, and they also were kind of engaged in a process where they became more manly, more men through the violence, and in relation to the woman, he kind of became dependent on the woman to create himself as a man. And this also explains why, I mean, we know, we who work with violence, that a situation where it's very dangerous for women is if she decides to leave, and if she managed to leave. And this also shows, I mean, the normalization process also gives us some keys to understand why this is so dangerous, because he also uses her to create himself as a man. So that's also part of this process. And also the fact that he switches between violence and care, or warmth, or love. And it's not only the violence that is dangerous, but it's the very switch, the fact that he uses this as something that is in his hand. He decides when to be violent and when to show love. So that's also part of this this process of why it's internalized for women.
It's great that you also mentioned that she interviewed men as well, because that's something that I forgot to mention at the beginning. I think one of the strengths of the book also comes from the very fact that we also see how men actually how they legitimize the violence that they use. I remember some excerpts from the book. Like the man says that, you know, he says like, she doesn't know how to do things. I need to teach her how to do things, etc. So it's, you know, it's the men, the violence actually, they put themselves in a superior position, and that's where you see inequality. The belief that I mean, the men, they believe that they are somehow superior to women, and then they should, you know, somehow guide women into the good path or something. So you know, you when you look at the interviews, you see literally that they say that, you know, I hit because I have to teach her how to behave in certain situations, etc. So, you know, that's in that sense, you know, it's really important in the way in which the theory emphasizes the relationship of violence to inequality as well. You know, that's where she draws the links, actually.
Exactly. Yes, and that this is about power. It's about gender, how gender is constructed through this process of violence, and it's about how gender and power is connected. How power, gendered power, so to say, is created through this process, and it's. I mean, because as you're right, the men actually talks about it as if they are doing her a favor, as if this is something that they are good to her because they teach her how to behave as a proper woman.
And educating women.
Educating women, exactly. And if we take this aspect of internalization that we talked about before from the woman's side, I mean, from the man's side, he thinks that he's educating her. From the woman's side, she's blaming him because it's not right to hit. But then gradually, she is blaming herself. Maybe I could have behaved in a different way so that he wouldn't hit me. But if we have that in one corner, and then we have the man's teaching of her in the other corner, we see how dangerous this becomes, because if she takes over his interpretation of him, it completely becomes her fault. He's doing her a favor when he's teaching her, and she has gradually lost her ability to think and to see what this is actually about, violence. So she is taking over his interpretation that he needs to teach her how to be a good woman. And this is also why it's so important to have shelters, to put it simply. I mean, so that we have people from the outside asking questions, listening to her when it's possible to say something, and believe in her, and not questioning her experiences, because maybe she is not able to break out herself when this internalization process has come too far. So shelters, or neighbors, or friends, or family. I mean, to dare to ask questions into this into a situation.
And also, it's a very, you know, it's not, of course, in the book, but we all know that there is also a sort of blaming for the women who continue to stay in this violent relationship.
Exactly.
And it is very often, you hear things like, of course, not in the feminist circles, but, in the wider audience, you always hear things like, maybe she likes that kind of a relationship. or maybe she's not, clever enough to, she shouldn't have, if she wasn't happy with this relationship, she would have left many years ago, etc. The type of blaming, or what we might call victim blaming, also takes place. But on the other hand, when we look at this process, where we see this process where women lose faith in themselves, we also have a way of empowering these women, or when they see this pattern, they actually, work towards their own empowerment in that sense. So the focusing on this process is also important in that sense as well. Otherwise, we go on categorizing women into powerful women and unpowerful women. Exactly. But, when we see this process, we see that, those of us who feel themselves very powerful might in one day find themselves in this situation where where they have lost all of their power in an abusive relationship. So this also makes this a very contextual process, or we pay attention to the context, not to the individuality of the women, or not to the personality. It's nothing related to the personality of the women. It's something about the context and the power relationships.
Exactly. And we can also see how dangerous it becomes when she's blamed by the society or the surroundings, and she's also blaming herself. So it becomes a very, very difficult situation to break out from. And this aspect of how it becomes a woman's fault if she stays in a violent relationship is something that has been discussed here in Sweden a lot, actually, because we have the self-image of being a gender equal society, and we also score, of course, very high often, as you know, in international comparison. But at the same time, and we also have a welfare system, not as good as it used to be, but still there. So it is possible to live a life as a divorced woman in Sweden. It's not a stigma attached to that in any sense, and most Swedish women also work. So this shame of not being in a gender equal relationship is something that hides the violence. But there is Roks actually published a book this autumn called this title is Women's Safety. And it is a big survey on men's violence against women, showing that half of women in Sweden have been exposed to violence after their 15th birthday. So it is still, and the numbers are even higher than 20 years ago. So it is also, on the surface a gender equal society, but it is also a very violent society where women are exposed to violence, particularly young women are exposed to violence. So the shame can come from many different, take many different forms and have many different aspects in them. Also, gender equality can become a shame for women who are exposed to violence. But yes.
When we were talking before this event, you were also, if I remember well, you were also mentioning a court case where this process of normalization was actually used in court.
Yeah.
You maybe talk about the specifics?
Yes, it's a very recent one. When first, in 1998, we got a new law in Sweden called a gross violation of a woman's integrity, and that law was based on the insights from or on the theory of the normalization process of violence, and it is a law that connects, that makes repeated crimes more severe than if you have separate crimes. I mean, if you have assault, if you have rape, for example, or if you, I mean, you see this continuum of violence, you see the process of violence. So that was a very important thing that happened in 1998. So we have that law, and this law is used. It could be used more. But what happened now, actually just a few weeks ago, was that there was a court case with a Swedish man, a middle-aged man, who was he got 10 years in prison, so quite high punishment. And among the crimes was this gross violation of a woman's integrity, but it was also rape and assault and threats and other kinds of crimes. But what happened was that in the court, they explicitly used the normalization process of violence, saying that it looked as if she had a choice if you look at it from the outside. But if you see what was going on in their relationship and how he gradually broke her down in this normalization process of violence, and how he internalized, how the internalization went on, so that she took over his interpretation of her life, then in practice she didn't have a choice. So this was something that the court actually said, that he had degraded her will. You cannot say that after this process in this relationship, she did not have a will. And both the prosecutor and her lawyer said that this could be a groundbreaking sentence, because I mean, it's a victory not only for her but for all abused women if you explicitly use the normalization process of violence in courts. So hopefully this means that the courts will listen more to what women have to say in the future.
I think it's a really groundbreaking decision, and also gives all of us hope that one day, the way in which we interpret this, the power relationships, the gendered power relationships, will have an effect on the on justice. I mean, for real justice.
Yeah.
In that sense.
So you asked me in the beginning what was new with this new version, and
yes.
I mean, mainly the reason why I translated, because there was big parts that was all or in Norwegian in this version, so I translated to Swedish, and that is that Eva has added a whole section on the normalization process for women and young boys and girls. No, sorry, not for women, for children, of course, for children and young boys and girls. And she says that when she started this, in the early studies of hers, it was only possible to, very gently touch upon the situation for children, because it was so difficult for the women to think about what their children might be exposed to. And it hurt too much for them to talk about their children. She's also talking about, when she talks about the normalization process of women, that one thing that is that for quite many women is the breaking point, the what makes them brave enough to leave is if they see that their children are also exposed, or if they are hurt in some way. But it was really difficult for them to talk about the situation for the children. And so the women downplayed the experiences of the children, but it was also the society that downplayed. At that time, in the late 80s or early 90s, it was really difficult to talk about how children are affected if a father is violent towards a mother. But this has gradually been a subject that has been put on the table, not the least because of feminist research and the women's shelters movement, of course. So it has been a debate that has gone from only seeing that men's violence against women is only about partners towards, and we had a few years ago, it became, we recognized that children are sometimes witnessing violence. And now, since last year, or 2021, we have a crime that is called gross violation of a child's integrity, not only a woman's integrity, but specifically looking at that it is hurtful for children to witness violence. So what she did when she interviewed children was to look at what does it mean to be close to violence in an environment where violence is. And what she found was that it was both about witnessing violence, but it was also quite often physical abuse against the child, and also sexual abuse against the child. And when she talks about what the consequences are for violence, she says that it depends on, first of all, how close she is to the perpetrator. If it's a father or if it's a person that is very close, it's more hurt, more damaging. Also, of course, how often it is, and how severe it is. Of course, it depends on the situation for the child. And in this section, she's also using this image that you could, between countries, but image of war, that she talks about the first step, or the first step is to cross a border. You have feelings of unrest, but the child's feelings are still there. You feel that this is not right. But the next step is, she talks about as invasion, that the perpetrator uses the closeness of the child and the fear of the child to invade that person's body and also mind. And this also comes with confusion for the child. What is happening? Because often children don't have words for this, but also feelings of guilt, that this is because of me. And the final step is occupation. That if you have an occupation between countries, it's a total resignation, and it's also losing your language, perhaps, and your culture and your self-determination, but also ability to see what's right and wrong. And again, like in the normalization process for women, you only have the perpetrator's view. And of course, this is more difficult for children to break, because you think this is completely normal because you don't have any other reference point. You think that this is the way of being a child, because this is perhaps how you were brought up. So it's even more difficult for children to break this normalization process. And she's really stressing that it's really important to listen to women, but it's even more perhaps important to listen to children if they dare to say just one small thing, and not to question, but to listen again and again, and to gradually make their experiences valid.
Thank you so much, Åsa. I'm really looking forward to read this for myself as well, and it was a great summary. I mean, I personally think that it is really important for us feminists to think about children's experiences of violence as well, because otherwise, especially in our context, in the guise of protecting children, those in power resort to keeping the family intact and so on, in the name of protecting the interests of children. They do not intervene in the violent relationship. So it's really important for us, for feminists, to think about and really intervene in that sense into this process of inequality. At this point, if you don't have anything to add, maybe we can also let Leyla talk a little bit about how the process of normalization, the concept, has been useful for Purple Roof's shelter and the work we do there.
Çok teşekkürler. Sesim geliyor değil mi?
Tamam. Geliyor, evet.
Thank you very much. I believe you can hear me. Thank you very much, Berna and Åsa. In fact, I would like to continue from where you stopped. What you said regarding the normalization of violence, both the book and you covered by talking, is in fact having an impact on the solidarity we are trying to have in Purple Roof. The first version, the first edition, we know that was published in 1984. In order it is very valuable for showing us the dynamics of violence. The efforts we have in Purple Roof is not about serving women. We have social work, psychological work, during which we talk about the dynamics of violence. Talking the dynamics of violence is important in order to put a distance to violence. And the book talks about the dynamics of violence, especially feminists talk about such dynamics. So I'm not being exerted violence because I am me. It is part of the power relationships that are present. So our seeing this is very important. On the other hand, there is something else. We as women, when we see violence, we can think that we deserve violence, or we are the reason of violence, and women who come to Purple Roof come together with these emotions, and we talk about these emotions, and these are mostly related to the dynamics that are generated because of violence. And in the cycle of violence and the psychological violence the women are confronted with, the woman's reality gets closer to the perpetrator's reality. And this is not maybe the loss of reality, but contortion of our self-reality. We might lose our self-confidence, and we might think being, and it might impact many aspects of our lives. So, and you cannot get away from violence immediately, but if you understand violence, then there is the possibility of you doing so. So our understanding the dynamics of violence is very critical. And when we see women applicants, we realize that men continue to use violence by understanding the concepts that are regarded as normal by the society. I am sick, I had many traumas in my childhood, what else should I do type of excuses. In our activity reports, there is something that we prioritize. And we define this as the psychologization of violence. And in fact, this is clearly defined by women's movement. And power relations and patriarchy is at the center of violence. However, there are societal myths which are also in play. And lately, in fact, this became like a disease. So in the field, the experts might be reproducing this. Men are narcissists, that's why they do it. They have psychological problems, that's why they do it. Even there are mainstream studies. Most men who use violence do not have any clinical condition that would put them far away from the reality. That is why this discourse, we have to pay attention to what it is reproducing. During recent years, we have certain TV series that are focusing on the childhood traumas of men, and they claim that men use violence because of such traumas. And both used by men, and at the same time, in our studies, we see that women who are victims of violence can leave the grief of the violence aside and try to make the man feel better, because the society tells us to keep the relationship solid and support the men. The physical and psychological damages created by the violence can be put aside in an attempt to try to help the man. We know that there are many psychological traumas in the childhood years of women as well. This doesn't necessarily lead us to using violence. And I would like to conclude. I want to leave time to questions as well. I would like to provide a small example from court processes. The example provided by us is very important. We have jurists among us, and they are part of the struggle. And in the court processes, if they could get to that point, in those processes, we can see that normalization is reflected to court judgments. And in purple violence, we really have experience in our hands. And we are trying to share this with different reports presented to the court. And we also provide witnesses in our attempt to be in solidarity with women. We have psychological evaluation reports at times, and our lawyer colleagues who are Purple Roof volunteers are in solidarity with women. So for us, this is a very important area of solidarity as well as a conclusion.